They betrayed me at 80, but I refused to die broken. At 80 years old, I believed I had earned peace. My empire, vast estates, thriving businesses, and carefully nurtured investments, stood as a testament to a lifetime of tireless work. I thought my children were loyal, ready to support me in my later years. The sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson as I sat in my leather chair, gazing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my study. The evening light cast long shadows across the mahogany desk where I'd signed countless deals that had built my fortune from nothing into something that would outlast me. Or so I thought. My hands still held steady at 80, my mind sharp as the day I'd made my first million. Michael, Sarah, and Thomas, my 3 children, had always expressed admiration for what I'd accomplished. They called regularly, visited often, and spoke eloquently about preserving my legacy. I believed them completely. Why wouldn't I? They were my blood, raised with my values, taught from childhood about the importance of loyalty and family above all else. The evening air carried a hint of jasmine from the garden my late wife had planted 30 years ago, and I allowed myself a rare moment of contentment. Tomorrow, I'd meet with my accountants to review the quarterly reports. Next week, the board meeting for my primary holding company. My calendar remained full, my purpose clear and unwavering. I'd worked too hard to simply fade away into comfortable retirement, becoming one of those old men who played golf and complained about their joints. But something felt different lately, though I couldn't quite articulate what troubled me. A tension lingered in the air during family dinners, conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered rooms, glances exchanged between my children that seemed to carry unspoken messages I couldn't decipher. I poured myself 2 fingers of scotch, the good stuff, aged longer than some of my grandchildren had been alive, and raised the crystal glass toward the fading light. Here's to another day successfully navigated, I thought. I had no idea my world was already crumbling beneath me, that the very foundation I'd spent 60 years building was being systematically dismantled by the people I trusted most. The first concrete sign appeared on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I called my primary banker, Gregory Morton, a man I'd known for 30 years. We'd done hundreds of deals together, built mutual trust through decades of successful business. His assistant answered with unusual formality, her voice carrying a professional distance that felt wrong. She explained that Mr. Morton was unavailable and would return my call. I thought nothing of it initially, everyone gets busy. But by Thursday no call had come. I tried again only to be told Gregory was in meetings. When we finally connected the following week, everything about the conversation felt off. Gregory's tone carried a distance that hadn't existed before, a careful neutrality that replaced our usual easy rapport. He suggested I might want to simplify my portfolio, and recommended transferring certain management duties to trusted family members who could handle the day-to-day stress. The words felt rehearsed as if he'd practiced them. I asked him directly what was going on, whether there were problems with my accounts I should know about. Gregory hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but I'd spent 60 years reading people in negotiations and I caught it. He assured me everything was fine, that he was simply thinking about my well-being, my age, the importance of reducing unnecessary stress. The conversation left me unsettled in ways I couldn't quite name. That same week, I noticed Margaret, my head of household staff, beginning to defer to Sarah before implementing my requests. Margaret had worked for me for 15 years, always efficient and direct. When I asked about rescheduling the landscaping crew to avoid disrupting a meeting I had planned, Margaret hesitated visibly, then said she'd check with Miss Sarah first. I felt a flash of irritation but said nothing. Perhaps Margaret was simply being thorough, ensuring family schedules aligned properly. But the pattern continued and expanded. My driver started confirming appointments with Thomas's assistant instead of simply following my instructions. The estate manager began copying Michael on emails that previously came to me alone. These were small changes, individually meaningless, but collectively they formed a disturbing picture I was only beginning to perceive. Reports from my retail holdings personally. The silence that followed lasted just a beat too long. Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah before responding that he'd already conducted the review and everything looked fine, profitable and stable. "No need to burden yourself with details, Dad," Michael said, smiling warmly while cutting his steak with deliberate precision. "We've got it covered. You trained us well." Thomas nodded agreement, raising his wine glass in a small toast. "You should be enjoying your retirement, not buried in spreadsheets." But I wasn't retired. I'd never announced retirement, never indicated I wanted to step back. The conversation moved on quickly, steered by Sarah toward safer topics. Grandchildren, vacation plans, the upcoming holidays. Yet I noted the deflection, filed it away in my mind. I'd built this empire through obsessive attention to detail, through noticing patterns others missed. Since when did my children decide what burdened me? The following week, my children requested a family meeting. They arrived together, their expressions carefully composed into masks of loving concern. We gathered in my study, and I felt immediately that something had been choreographed. Sarah spoke first, her voice gentle and measured, explaining that they'd all noticed me seeming tired lately, occasionally forgetting small details. I started to object. I'd forgotten nothing, but Thomas interrupted smoothly, providing specific examples. A lunch appointment I'd supposedly missed, though I had no record of it in my calendar or my memory. A conversation about renovating the East Wing that I couldn't recall having, though Thomas insisted it had happened just last week. Michael added that his doctor friend had mentioned how stress impacts cognitive function in seniors, how important it was to reduce unnecessary burdens before they caused serious health problems. The intervention felt rehearsed, each child playing their part with disturbing precision. They suggested I consider letting them handle more of the day-to-day business operations. Just temporarily, they assured me. Just until I felt more myself, more energized and focused. They'd prepared papers, already drawn up by the family attorney, documents that would grant them power of attorney for business decisions while I retained oversight and final authority. Sarah pulled out the papers from a leather portfolio, pointing to signature lines marked with yellow tabs. The language seemed straightforward enough as she explained it. Temporary delegation of authority, revocable at any time, designed to reduce stress while maintaining my ultimate control. I felt cornered but also began doubting myself. Perhaps I was more tired than I realized. Perhaps they genuinely wanted to help. The three of them watched me expectantly, waiting. I signed the first document, then another, as my children watched with expressions of relief and satisfaction. Michael squeezed my shoulder. "You've carried this weight long enough, Dad. Let us help. You've earned your rest." Something in my gut twisted uncomfortably, an instinct honed through decades of business deals gone wrong, but I pushed the feeling aside. These were my children. They loved me. They wanted what was best for me. Didn't they? Within days, I noticed those signatures being used in ways I hadn't anticipated. Documents appeared requiring my approval, but when I requested time to review them thoroughly, Michael explained they were time-sensitive, that delays would cost thousands in missed opportunities or violated contract terms. Sarah would arrive with contracts needing immediate signatures for property management agreements, insurance renewals, investment reallocations. The urgency became constant, the pressure subtle but persistent and exhausting. I tried to slow things down, insisting on consulting my own attorney before signing anything else. But when I called Harold Simmons, the lawyer who'd handled my affairs for 20 years, his assistant informed me that my retainer had been terminated. At my family's request, she explained. They'd indicated I was transitioning legal representation to someone who better understood my current needs and health situation. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. I immediately hired a new attorney, a younger man named Peter Collins who came highly recommended. But I discovered my financial records had been reorganized, access restricted pending verification of authorization. Peter requested documents that I could no longer easily obtain. Everything required approval from Michael, Sarah, or Thomas, who provided information in carefully curated portions, always with explanations about protecting my privacy and security from potential fraud or exploitation. Bank statements arrived late or not at all. When I called to inquire, representatives spoke to me with the careful condescension reserved for confused elderly customers, suggesting I speak with the authorized parties on my account, my children. Property deeds were being transferred to family trusts for estate planning purposes. Business shares were being redistributed to optimize tax strategies. Each change came with reasonable explanations, technical language that obscured the fundamental truth I was slowly beginning to perceive. I was being systematically separated from my empire. My social world began to shrink simultaneously. Old friends called less frequently. When I tried to arrange lunch with James Crawford, my former business partner and closest friend for 40 years, his wife apologetically explained that James had been told I wasn't receiving visitors due to health concerns. I immediately called Michael, demanding to know who'd been spreading such lies. Michael's response was calm, almost therapeutic in tone. He explained they'd simply been honest with people, that I'd been under significant stress, that my doctor recommended limiting social obligations to prevent further health decline. Nothing malicious, just protecting me from exhaustion. But I hadn't seen any doctor recently. I said so, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. Michael paused before responding that perhaps that was part of the problem, that I wasn't recognizing my own limitations, that my memory might be less reliable than I believed. The conversation ended tensely, leaving me shaken and questioning my own perceptions. The staff treated me differently now too. Margaret spoke in the gentle, careful tones one uses with a child. My driver helped me into the car with excessive caution, as if I might shatter at any moment. Even Roberto, the gardener who'd worked the estate for 15 years, looked at me with pity when our paths crossed. One night I couldn't sleep. Insomnia had plagued me lately, my mind churning through everything that had changed, trying to separate paranoia from legitimate concern, trying to trust my own judgment. Near midnight, I rose from bed and walked slowly through the darkened hallways of my mansion, using the walls for support. My body felt heavier lately, aged in ways that frustrated and frightened me. Approaching the library, I heard voices, my children, speaking in tones they never used when I was present. I stopped, pressing myself against the wall in the shadows, listening. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the partially open door. The documents are nearly complete. Another month, maybe 2, and we'll have full control of everything. Michael responded, his tone coldly businesslike. The attorneys say we need to be careful. If he challenges anything now while he's still coherent, we could face complications. Better to wait until he's less aware. Thomas laughed, the sound cold and completely unfamiliar to me. He barely understands what he signs anymore. Did you see him yesterday trying to remember where he'd put his reading glasses? They were on his head the entire time. More laughter. I felt my chest constrict, breath coming shallow and rapid. Sarah continued, once we have everything transferred, we can sell the commercial properties. Marcus has a buyer lined up, offering $20 million above market value. We split it 3 ways, nobody knows the difference. Dad thinks the properties are still generating rental income like always. Michael added, and the foundation assets. We dissolve the charitable trusts, redirect the funds. He set up those trusts 40 years ago. He won't remember the specifics or even think to check on them. They discussed my empire as vultures discuss carrion, dividing pieces with casual cruelty that took my breath away. Every suspicion I'd harbored, every instinct I'd questioned, was confirmed in those terrible minutes. My children, the people I'd loved unconditionally, provided for, trusted above all others, were systematically stealing everything I'd built. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt something break inside me. I tried to walk back to my room to process what I'd heard, to plan my response. But my legs failed me. The shock, the betrayal, the sudden overwhelming weight of understanding what my children had become, it all crashed over me simultaneously like a physical force. I stumbled, catching myself against the console table, sending a crystal vase crashing to the floor. The sound shattered the night's silence. The voices in the library stopped abruptly. Footsteps approached rapidly. I tried to straighten myself, to compose my features into something other than horror and heartbreak, but my body refused to cooperate. Maya became my lifeline over the following nights. We developed a simple but effective system. Questions answered with hand squeezes, 1 for no, 2 for yes, 3 for uncertainty. Gradually, patiently, she understood the situation. Not everything, but enough to recognize that I was trapped in a body that had partially betrayed me while my mind remained intact and alert. She also recognized that my family's concern felt performative, that something was fundamentally wrong with the picture they presented to the world. Maya had her own reasons for understanding betrayal. She confided one night that she'd watched her grandmother lose everything to neglectful children who'd stolen her savings and left her in a terrible state facility to die alone. The memory made her protective of elderly patients, alert to signs of exploitation that others might miss or ignore. She began documenting my actual condition in personal notes kept separate from my official charts, noting the discrepancies between my apparent awareness and what the medical record suggested. She also started reporting to me about my children's visits when I was supposedly asleep or too sedated to notice. I'd been right to suspect them. Their conversations when they thought me unconscious were coldly businesslike, discussing my empire as if I were already dead. Sarah discussed selling the estate to a developer. Michael mentioned offshore accounts being established. Thomas coordinated with attorneys about accelerating probate strategies to avoid taxation. Maya brought me newspapers during her shifts, reading headlines quietly while pretending to adjust my pillows or check my vitals. The world continued without me. My companies were being restructured under new leadership. Properties were being listed quietly with exclusive brokers. My children gave carefully crafted interviews to business publications about managing their father's affairs during his tragic health crisis, presenting themselves as dutiful and devoted children sacrificing their own lives to care for an ailing parent. The public narrative was being written, and I was being systematically erased from my own story, written out of the empire I'd built with my own hands. But with Maya's help, I began planning my resurrection with the same careful attention I'd once applied to business deals. She smuggled in my phone during her shifts, holding it at angles where I could see the screen, navigating according to my hand signals. My access had been restricted on most accounts, but I could still read messages and emails that came through. I saw communications between my children and my former attorneys, my accountants, my business partners. Everything confirmed what I'd overheard that terrible night. They were systematically dismantling my empire, piece by piece, transaction by transaction. Maya had a brother who was a physical therapist. She mentioned my case to him carefully, revealing nothing confidential but asking hypothetically about stroke recovery and what level of function might be possible with intensive, private therapy off the official record. Her brother Marcus was intrigued and agreed to consult unofficially during late-night hours when the hospital wing was quiet and understaffed. Marcus assessed me with professional thoroughness during his first visit. The stroke had been real and had caused genuine damage, but far less than the official report suggested. With proper therapy, Marcus believed significant recovery was possible. But it would require work, painful, exhausting work that I would need to hide from everyone except my small circle of trusted allies. We began that very night. Marcus guided me through exercises designed to restore neural pathways, to retrain muscles, to rebuild strength that had atrophied. The sessions were agony that left me sweating and trembling. My body fought me, cramping and failing repeatedly. I wanted to quit, to surrender to the comfortable narrative that I was finished. But then I'd remember my children's laughter as they divided my empire, and fury would drive me forward through the pain. Over weeks, progress came in tiny, hard-won increments. I regained some control over my facial muscles, learning to relax the slackness I displayed to others while maintaining enough control to eat and speak when alone with Maya. My left arm slowly responded to commands, though I kept it limp and useless looking during daytime hours. My speech improved gradually, but I continued mumbling and slurring when anyone official was present, maintaining my disguise perfectly. I became a master of deception, playing two roles simultaneously. During the day with doctors, family, and most staff, I was the diminished Elias Ward, a shell of my former self, barely aware of my surroundings. At night, with Maya and Marcus, I became myself again, angry, determined, plotting my return with cold calculation. Through Maya, I made contact with my original attorney, Harrison Fletcher. Harrison was 83 now, technically retired, but his mind remained razor-sharp and his loyalty unquestionable. He came to visit one evening, officially just an old friend paying respects to someone he'd known for 40 years. He sat beside my bed, speaking casually about old times, his words carefully chosen to carry double meanings that would seem innocent to any observer but conveyed crucial information to me. "Remember when we set up those irrevocable trusts, Elias?" Harrison said conversationally, as if reminiscing. "Built them like fortresses designed to withstand any siege. The keys were scattered, hidden in plain sight. You'd need to be dead for anyone to unlock them, and even then only in very specific circumstances that we designed together. We were paranoid back then, weren't we? Worried about hostile takeovers, about family members who might get greedy after your success." I squeezed Harrison's hand twice. Yes, I remember everything." Harrison continued, outlining in seemingly innocent reminiscence exactly what protections existed. The trusts controlled the most valuable assets. They required my personal signature, witnessed and notarized, not just power of attorney authorization for any major transactions. My children had been signing documents, but those signatures were only valid for certain minor operational matters. The major moves they were planning, selling properties, dissolving trusts, transferring core assets, all required specific legal steps that they hadn't yet completed. They'd been moving carefully, building toward a final takeover, but they hadn't reached it yet. I still had time. Harrison's visit provided me with something precious beyond measure, hope and a path forward. If I acted quickly and strategically, I could still stop them. But I needed to be smart about it. Confronting them directly while still vulnerable would be disastrous. They'd find ways to have me declared incompetent, to accelerate their plans, to seal me away permanently in some facility where I'd never be heard from again. No, I needed to regain my strength first, to secure my legal footing, and then strike when they least expected it with overwhelming force. 6 weeks after my stroke, I was moved to a rehabilitation facility. My children presented it as the next step in my recovery, a place where I'd receive intensive therapy and professional care. In reality, I recognized it as another form of isolation, a place where they could control my environment completely, away from the hospital's institutional oversight and potential witnesses. The facility was expensive and exclusive, catering to wealthy families who wanted their elders maintained comfortably but invisibly, out of sight and out of mind. Many residents were far more diminished than me, wandering in various stages of dementia, providing perfect camouflage for my deception. I played along perfectly, allowing myself to be transferred without protest. But Maya had followed me, having applied for a position at the facility and been hired thanks to her excellent references from the hospital. She worked night shifts again, and the facility's more relaxed oversight made our continued work easier and safer. The rehabilitation continued secretly, now in the privacy of my room during quiet hours. Marcus came less frequently due to the facility's restrictions, but Maya had learned enough to guide me herself. My mobility improved significantly. I could walk short distances with support, though I kept this ability completely hidden, maintaining a wheelchair-dependent appearance during all official hours. My speech became clear again, but only in the dark, in whispers, with people I trusted absolutely. Maya brought me a smartphone she'd purchased with cash and activated under a false name. With her help, I began gathering evidence methodically. I accessed email accounts my children thought secured, using old passwords they'd never thought to change because they believed me incapable of such actions. I found email chains discussing property sales, asset transfers, and the systematic dismantling of my charitable foundations. The very foundations I'd established to help others, now being gutted for personal profit. They'd sold my commercial real estate portfolio for $63 million, pocketing the proceeds and reporting to accountants that the properties had been refinanced. They dissolved 3 charitable trusts, claiming the funds were being consolidated for tax efficiency, but the money had been distributed to their personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. They'd taken out loans against properties they didn't actually control, using forged documents that bore photocopied versions of my signature. The scale of the theft was staggering, breathtaking in its audacity. In less than 4 months, my children had stolen or diverted nearly $90 million. But they'd been sloppy in their confidence, leaving digital trails everywhere. Harrison Fletcher filed emergency motions in probate court with all the evidence I'd gathered. The filings were sealed, the hearings scheduled privately to prevent my children from interfering. Harrison requested immediate suspension of the power of attorney documents, temporary freezing of all estate assets pending investigation, and an independent competency hearing where I could demonstrate my actual condition. 3 weeks later I made my move. My children had called an emergency family meeting at the estate, panicking because accounts were suddenly freezing, transactions were failing, and they couldn't understand why. They gathered in my former study, arguing loudly about what had gone wrong with their perfect plan. They didn't see me enter. I'd walked from the car with Maya's help, using a cane for support but moving under my own power. I stood in the doorway of my own study, watching them for a long moment. These strangers who wore my children's faces, who'd betrayed everything I'd taught them about honor and loyalty and family. "Hello, Michael. Sarah. Thomas," I said clearly, my voice strong and unwavering. They froze, turning to stare at me with expressions of absolute shock. The color drained from Sarah's face. Michael's mouth literally fell open. Thomas dropped the papers he'd been holding. That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "You can't," the doctors said. "The doctors said what you told them to say," I replied, stepping fully into the room. "Just like the staff said what you told them to say. Just like everyone believed the story you crafted so carefully. But I heard everything that night before my stroke. I know exactly what you've done. And now so does the court. I laid out everything, every forged document, every stolen asset, every lie they'd orchestrated against me. I had proof of all of it, documented meticulously. Their accounts were frozen. Their assets were being seized. Criminal charges were being filed. The empire they tried to steal was being returned to its rightful owner, me. 6 months later, I walked through my restored offices, every asset reclaimed, every lie exposed to the harsh light of justice. My children faced consequences. Michael and Thomas were convicted of fraud and embezzlement, facing prison time. Sarah accepted a plea deal, testifying against her brothers in exchange for probation and complete disinheritance. I felt no satisfaction in their destruction, only a deep sadness for what they'd chosen to become. Maya became my trusted assistant and eventually my friend, one of the few genuine relationships in my life. Together, we established the Ward Foundation for Elder Protection, ensuring that no one would suffer the betrayal and exploitation I had experienced. We funded legal aid, investigated nursing facilities, and prosecuted elder abuse cases with the full weight of my resources behind each one. I walked through my estate and offices now, scarred but unbroken, victorious not through violence but through patience, strategy, and the unwillingness to surrender. Betrayal had tested me, had nearly destroyed me, had stripped me down to nothing but will and determination. But I'd survived. I'd fought back from the edge of oblivion. And I'd won. At 80 years old, I'd learned the hardest lesson of my life. That blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, that love can be faked, that the people closest to you can become your greatest enemies. But I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever known, that I could survive even the deepest betrayal, that I refused to die broken. I stood at my window now, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and crimson, just as I had on that evening so many months ago when my world was crumbling without my knowledge. But everything was different now. I was different. Harder, perhaps. More cautious, certainly. But also more alive than I'd been in years. I'd faced death and betrayal and had emerged on the other side, not unscathed but unbowed. They tried to erase me, to write me out of my own story. But I'd written the final chapter myself. And it was a chapter of triumph, of justice, of an old man who refused to go quietly into the darkness. I raised my glass of scotch to the fading light once more, but this time the toast was different. Here's to survival, I thought. Here's to fighting back. Here's to refusing to die broken, no matter who tries to break you. The sun set slowly beyond my window, painting the world in gold and shadow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new moments requiring strength I wasn't sure I possessed. But I'd face them standing upright, clear-eyed, and absolutely certain of one truth I'd earned through suffering. I would never be erased again. Not by my children, not by age, not by illness, not by anyone. Elias Ward had returned from the dead, and he was here to stay. The empire was restored. The betrayers were punished. And I was free, truly free, perhaps for the first time in my 80 years. Free from illusions about family loyalty. Free from the burden of unconditional trust. Free to build something new on the ruins of what had been destroyed. Free to protect others from the nightmare I'd survived. As darkness finally claimed the sky, I turned from the window and walked back to my desk, back to the work that gave my life meaning and purpose. There were foundations to build, people to help, legacies to create that couldn't be stolen or destroyed. They tried to kill me, not with violence but with betrayal, isolation, and systematic theft. They tried to erase everything I'd built over 6 decades of relentless work. They'd nearly succeeded. But nearly wasn't enough. I'd survived their betrayal. I'd reclaimed my empire. I'd exposed their lies. I'd rebuilt my life from the ashes of their treachery. And I'd done it all at 80 years old, proving that age doesn't determine strength, that being knocked down doesn't mean staying down, that even when everything is taken from you, the one thing they can never steal is your refusal to surrender. That night, as I finally allowed myself to rest, I realized something profound. My children had given me an unexpected gift. In trying to destroy me, they'd revealed exactly how strong I actually was. In trying to take everything, they'd shown me what truly mattered. In trying to write my ending, they'd forced me to write my own resurrection. I closed my eyes, truly at peace for the first time in months, knowing that tomorrow I'd wake up and continue the work of rebuilding, not just my empire but myself, stronger and wiser than before. They betrayed me at 80. They tried to leave me broken and forgotten. But I'd refused to accept their narrative. I'd refused to surrender. I'd refused to die broken. And that refusal had made all the difference.